Good morning. As we prepare our imaginations for worship, hear these words from Psalm 15. O God, who may abide in your tent, who may dwell on your holy hill, those who walk blamelessly and do what is right and speak the truth from their heart. Now, here are some announcements for our lives together. Connect cards are in the back on the counter, and there will be a digital connect card dropped in the chat for those who are joining us on Zoom. There will be no PowerPoint today, so people on Zoom, sorry. Mr. Corey is away on vacation, getting some much needed rest. So special thanks to Pastor Beatrix for doing Wondering Time today. And special thanks to Beverly and Renee, though they might not be able to hear us, for being back there with the little ones today. Also, today is Kirk Sunday, so Pastor Patrick will be talking to us a little bit later about that. And in your bulletin, you can find information about Adam's weekendly service scripture. And also, February 19th, save the date, is Ask the Pastor Sunday, where Pastor Patrick and Pastor Beatrix will answer all of your burning biblical questions. You can submit those questions in the bag on the back table, or if you just want to like ask them the day of, you can do that too. And questions submitted in the bag, you don't have to put your name on it. It can be anonymous if you'd like it to be.
You can take unbiblical questions.
Unbiblical questions as well. So, you know, if this is the, you know, if you wanted Pastor Patrick and Pastor Beatrix to tell your kids where babies come from, this is I'll also say the date. St. Patrick's Day Beer and Hymns, Friday, March 17th at 6 p.m. at the church. So be here or you don't get any green beer. Alrighty. And now let's bring in the light together. And you can rise in body or spirit, sorry. Jesus brought healing love to all people.
They talked and marveled about his miracles.
But did they really understand him?
They wanted healing, but didn't necessarily want change.
Jesus brings us transforming compassion.
Jesus loved us in friendships where love changes us.
And our minds can be changed.
May the lives of Christ
Help us grow.
And if you'll remain standing in the body, mind, or spirit, and our opening hymn is number 775. 775.
Our Flourish language, printed in your bulletin, is language of who we are as a community of faith. Please join me as we read it in unison. Flourish, alone, together. We practice wholehearted life, alone and together. Evergreen is an open and affirming faith community, rooted in the way of Jesus. We grow through spiritual practices. As we celebrate the gift of community, we share Christ's peace with one another. Remember to watch for what your neighbors may be comfortable with, whether that's handshakes, hugs, peace signs, whatever it may be. Peace of Christ be with you.
How are you?
Our tech support. And also with you. Peace be with you. Yeah, peace be with you. I need a set. All right. Hey friends, my name is Beatrix. I'm the parish associate pastor here and chaplain of Rhodes College, and today I'm filling in for our beloved Mr. Corey. So any children who want to participate, I'm going to invite to come on up. And that's all right. They're participating in the spirit. So, well, since my children of God today actually do know how to read, this is actually pretty helpful for my sermon. Okay, this half the room, can you help me out and say, can you read that word aloud that's on the ground there? Thank you. This half the room, can you read that word aloud? Thank you. Okay, now we're gonna flip it. That's half the room. Can you read that word, please? Swims. This half the room. Swims. Thank you. So good. Okay. Here's another one. This half the room. Talk to me.
Yeah.
Talk to me.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah.
Again. Okay, I love it. Okay. Now we're gonna start on this half of the room. What does this say?
Come in.
Come in. What does this say?
Go away.
Let me hear it again. What does this say? It says come in, and then on this side,
Go away.
it says go away. Joanna's working really hard. Not too fast. All right. Now let me get one volunteer. You're gonna do it. You are literally paid. Okay. This side it says go away. What happens if we walk over here? Can you read it from this side?
Come in.
So it says come in. Thank you, Latifah. It says come in when we look at it from this angle. And it says go away when we look at it from this angle. And as we're talking these last couple of weeks about it's okay to change your mind, I just wanted to demonstrate that sometimes when you're in a disagreement, the best way to understand what the other person is thinking is to stand up, walk around, and look at it from their position. So look at it from their lens, right? And then it turns out that you were both right. It just depends on how you're looking at it. And it's okay to change your mind. That's all. Boom, that's it. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your reading skills today.
Okay. Our sacred reading for today is from Mark's Gospel, chapter 13, verses 1 through 8. But before we hear the reading, let's share a word of prayer. Spirit of the living God, help us to hear with joy what your word is revealing to us today. Amen. Hear what the Spirit is saying to us today. As Jesus came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings." Then Jesus asked him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will this be? And what will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished?" Then Jesus began to say to them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places, there will be famines, but this is the beginning of the birth pangs. The grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of God endures forever." Amen.
A couple quick announcements for this community of faith. One is, as Pastor Beatrix said and Latifah said, our series is It's Okay to Change Your Mind up until Lent begins. So the night before Lent begins, Shrove Tuesday, the night before Ash Wednesday, we're going to have an event here at the church. One of our favorite Louisiana natives, Bud Ritchie, there's Bud, put him on the spot, is going to cook some delicious Louisiana food for us and us, and I think the good folks at Neighborhood Church, the congregation that worships in this space on Sunday nights. We're going to have some great Louisiana cooking right here in this space. That's going to start at 6:30, and then at 7, we're going to do an event we're calling Sanctified, where folks can sign up. If you have anything that's really, really embarrassing, from, like a devotional or an old journal or an old, kids or teen study Bible, and you want to read it because there's something really profound about it, but also because it's hilarious and you want to share it with all your friends, that's what you can do. It was inspired by the podcast Mortified, where people do that with their own childhood diaries and journals. So we'll be having that event in addition to the delicious food on Tuesday. I guess that's Tuesday, February 21st, or at Wednesday. Also, all these bags that we got donated, many of y'all brought in so much luggage for the youth who are at residential care for youth villages. When they get discharged, they often don't have bags or luggage to take their stuff back with them. So it's cost effective and simple to give them trash bags to do that. But there's something not great about that. So CK had the idea of, hey, let's take up some offerings of bags that folks can take with them and use. And I wasn't sure, but I thought maybe we'll get a dozen. I don't know how many there are, but there's way more than a dozen, and you can't tell because they've all now been consolidated and packed into each other. So when you see one suitcase, you're really seeing 6. So they are finally, because it took a minute to find a spot to store them because we had so many, which is a great problem. So CK talked to folks at Youth Villages, and so she and Keith and Renee are going to load them up in the car. So after worship, if you are available for a quick sec to help load up some bags, please see CK, Keith, Renee by the door, and we'll get those suckers loaded up so they can go do what they were meant to do. Also, we had started looking into working with a program through Presbyterian Peace Fellowship called Guns to Gardens, where we accept guns and turn them, break them down and melt them down and turn them into garden tools.
And so several of us had started working on that training a few months back. There was an online training for that. We had some early discussions, and of course the holidays came up and your pastor dropped the ball. So we are getting that up and running again. And we're gonna have a meeting right after worship on Sunday, February 12th. And if you've been on the fence of like, I'd like to get involved with this, but I'm not sure because I haven't been to any meetings yet, that's totally fine. Like you can come in on a blank slate, no problem. Also, if you're still on the fence and you need a sign from the Holy Spirit, there's gonna be lunch provided. So there you go. So right after worship, Sunday, February 12th, stick around, there'll be lunch and we're gonna make sure that people have a spot to fit in where they need to fit in so we can start building some partnerships, start getting a plan going and start moving forward with this program. All right. It's okay to change your mind. I don't know why I'm messing with these papers. I literally didn't write out my sermon because it's just on the heart today. Much to my seminary professor's dismay. So in this series, we're kind of exploring why, not only why it's just natural for human beings to change our minds, but also why it is faithful. And I was thinking a lot, we were thinking about this series, I was thinking a lot about what have I really changed my mind about? And one of those things is what on earth the church is and what the church should be. I grew up, and of course, as we're doing this series, I'm realizing I'm telling you a lot of stories about myself because I'm telling about a time when I changed my mind and hoping that maybe you can relate in some form. When I was growing up, I grew up small town, Northeast Tennessee. And there were these things at my church that I learned or kind of felt like I needed to know or needed to believe about church, sometimes because they were directly said to me by an adult, and I was at an age where every adult was 100% right 100% of the time. So anything that was just kind of part of the culture of the church was what the church is supposed to be. So for me, downtown historic church, Presbyterian church, I thought like, okay, it's really, really important. That church is a place that it's God's house, right? It's God's house. So you got to really be on your best behavior because that's where God lives. And you don't want God to see you be on bad behavior. So you got to be on best behavior in the church. You got to dress up well because you got to give God your best. So you got to put on nice, very uncomfortable clothes. There's communion etiquette, right? Like there's when you take the bread, there's when you drink they said wine, but it tasted like grape juice. It was really good wine, I guess. And then you have to pop, you can't play with it. You got to pop it in the little holder in the pew in front of you and leave it alone. And you can't slurp the little bit of grape juice, wine at the bottom. You got to, kind of stir it. What else did I learn about church? I learned that you're not supposed to like the music. It's supposed to be really boring and sometimes in other languages that you don't understand because that's the more fancy the music is, the holier it is. And that's a good thing. That there's, when worship starts, you have to be quiet. And then you have to have the parade of robed people, and you have to respect them because they've got robes on. And they're going to come up to the front. And I learned, I never knew what an organ was. We couldn't see the organ at my home church. It was really hard to see it, so it had to get explained to me as a young age that it was a super piano. And I was like, okay, it's a super piano. And then I learned that it was powered by pipes or something. The pipes made the noise because I found some in a church closet. They were ones that weren't any good. They wouldn't be used again, but of course it's a church, you're not gonna throw them out. You're just gonna put them in a closet. So I found one that was about my height at the time, probably, a little over 4 feet, kind of busted up, but pretty light. I could lift it up. And as a kid who loved Star Wars, that thing suddenly became a lightsaber. And then it was explained to me that it's an organ pipe and I can't play with it, even though it's no good and it's trash. And I went back in the closet and it's probably still there. I learned that you have to go to Sunday school and be on your best behavior. What else did I learn? I learned that you shake hands with men and look them in the eye. You can hug women. Yeah. I learned, what else did I learn? I learned when I started to get to be an acolyte and pass the plates around that you really had, if you saw someone bring out a bag of change, that meant both hands. Because one hand, especially as a kid, you're not gonna be able to hold that sucker. Or if you're worried when the wrist goes out, there was one time where someone put change as my wrist was moving and that thing almost just took off down the pew. So you start to learn the little tools of the trade. Then I got into high school, got into youth group. And then I started learning that that church is about, you go there on Sundays and worship is not about what you get out of it, but what you put into it. I was told that a lot. It's not about what you get out of it, what you put into it. So that meant like, you can't complain about anything, so it's about what you put into it. Like, that's what it's about. And then I learned that church is about compassion. Okay, that makes sense. I had a very sweet pastor growing up, very pastoral, very funny, good personality, kind pastor, and really cared about him. He's a good guy. So I talked about him last week, Dr. Dan. And then I had a director of Christian education, who was kind of like our youth minister in maybe other congregations, what they might call him, Alan, who was a great mentor to me. He taught me a lot. I didn't realize until later in life how much he really had taught me. But I felt like when I got into middle school and high school, it was like, okay, we need to be compassionate at school with everyone, right? That's kind of as far as the compassion went. Just like love on everyone and be nice. Like compassion really just meant being nice is kind of what I was equating it with. Compassion just means being nice to people. And then I got on the Presbytery Youth Council, which was where we would do a lot of work like planning these retreats for other youth in the Presbytery. So this would have been like the upper northeast tip of Tennessee, which was really just a really cool way to like meet people at our rival high schools, and do this like churchy events with them. And I somehow got elected vice moderator. I don't even remember running for that, but I didn't have to do anything because the moderator, she was on her stuff and she was great. We would meet every couple of months, but then there was one time where she wasn't going to be there for the meeting and I had to run the meeting. And I was told about this thing called Robert's Rules that I had to learn about so I could run the meeting. And I did not realize until that month, I was a junior in high school, how much Presbyterians love Robert's Rules. That it's pretty much like Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Robert, and people that we really care about. And as I was reading the book on Robert's Rules, I still got the old thing in my office. I remember thinking, this guy is so organized and so smart and has to be the most boring human being at a party that I can imagine. I had to learn Robert's Rules, how to run a meeting. Then I had to learn how to do recreation with other youth. What are the games, if you want the youth to end up in a circle, what game can you play where they end up in a circle at the end of the game? That was the genius of the gospel, right? It was like making sure that all the youth are included and they end up in a circle and okay, it's prayer time, let's all talk about Jesus. I thought I really had a handle on what church was. It was that God's house, that place where everyone comes and everyone's nice to each other and everything flows and everything is also, as Presbyterians like to say, decent and in order. I also learned, speaking of decent and in order, from a young age, all the way into youth group, that the parlor of our church was off limits if you were under the age of 18. Do not go into that parlor. There were too many lock-ins where we would try to sneak into the parlor just to be in there. We wouldn't want to do anything because there's nothing like fun to play with. It's like really fancy, kind of smelly couches, but they look nice, and then all this old, dishware and everything. But we would always, try to sneak in just to say we were in there and sneak back out. And I think if I went to a session maybe when I was young, of people that I really think are good-hearted, wonderful people, and I said, do you like the youth of this church more or the parlor? They would lovingly say the parlor. And I think if I asked if you love Jesus more or the parlor, I think they'd eventually say Jesus, but they'd have to think about it, right? And then I went to college. And in my sophomore year, a year and a half after living away from home, I went to the college conference at Montreat Conference Center, Montreat, North Carolina. And I went with the group from Auburn that is now Auburn UKirk, and you're gonna hear a little more about UKirk a little later. But it was the campus ministry. UKirk hadn't really become a thing yet, like the national, like this is our name, and this is Presbyterian campus ministry all over the country. So everyone every school had their own little Presbyterian ministry with a different name. Ours was Presbyterian Student Fellowship, PSF. So I went to the PSF group, which I hadn't really been that involved in because I was feeling a pull to seminary, and I was like, I feel like now's the time where I don't have to go to church because one day I'm going to be at the church a lot. So I was kind of on the fringe of that group, but then decided, I'm going to go. I'm going to go to this college conference at Montreat thing. I'd been to Montreat a lot growing up. It's only about an hour from where I was born and raised. But it was always for worship and music conference in the summer, which was all ages. So there were maybe a couple hundred of my peers that were there. This was the first time in January, being in Montreat, A, in the winter, and there's a ton of snow, and B, when vast majority of people there are my peers. And this conference had about 700 or 800 college students. And it had just gotten moved from May to January and was having a lot more success of having students able to come that time of year. And I didn't really know what to expect, but I saw a lineup of 2 keynote speakers and then a preacher. One keynote speaker, the first one, was a guy named Shane Claiborne. He's from Maryville, Tennessee, and he sounds like it, got that real thick East Tennessee accent. Very tall, slender fellow. He's not that much older than me. I mean, he's maybe his 40s, still a pretty young guy. He got up on the stage and he had glasses, and then he looked like he was wearing like almost like potato sacks, kind of white dude with dreads. And you come to find out that he makes his own clothes, because as he learned more and more about clothing, he learned about how much of our clothing is made in sweatshops. So he got his mom to teach him how to sew, and he sewed his own clothes. He talked about growing up in Maryville and what he had learned in his very evangelical church about, the gospel and what it meant to follow Jesus. And then he went to college at Eastern University up in Philadelphia, which I don't know if any of you are familiar with someone named Tony Campolo, who's now probably in his 80s. Tony is a big, passionate Baptist, white Italian heritage, fiery guy who taught sociology at Eastern. He's now professor emeritus at Eastern University and has done a lot over the years writing. Calls himself an evangelical, but he doesn't really fit in with a lot of what we picture when we hear evangelical. He's always been someone, big advocate for people who are marginalized. And Shane studied under Tony. And while he was living in Philadelphia, going to school, he noticed how horrible the issues of people being unhoused are. In Maryville, you don't really see as much of that. There is a lot of poverty in Appalachia, but you don't see it. It's not in your face as much as it is in a place like Philadelphia. So in the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia, a bunch of college students, Shane and his classmates, found an old church that had been boarded up, and they pretty much broke in and created kind of a living community. And of course, this led to a few legal battles and a lot of issues with the city of trying to make sure that there's a community for these folks who were unhoused. Multiple times they were arrested for handing out food to people in the parks, which sometimes laws will be passed where you can't feed people because they don't want to promote homelessness in that area. So what they would do is they would bring pizza and say that it was part of their religion to have pizza as communion. So they weren't actually feeding people, they were just celebrating the Eucharist with pizza. Then one summer, Shane went to Calcutta and spent some time with Mother Teresa. This was not long before she died. And then, several years later, after he had created with some other folks the Simple Way in the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia, that what was really kind of came out of that place for unhoused people, he went to Iraq. When I was at Montreat for this, when I was hearing him speak, this was January 2008. So only a few years prior, he had gone to Iraq during the Shock and Awe campaign. And he went there with a few other American Christians to say, we're going to be with you, to tell you that no matter what you might hear from some of our politicians and no matter what kind of pain you might experience, not all of us believe that this is what God wants for you or for this world. And he talked about being with folks when one of our missiles had hit a children's hospital in their community and what that was like, and having to try to talk about the rhetoric from some of our own politicians that they would see over there on the news, and how he had to explain that that's not the Jesus that he knows. And as he is sharing these stories, my mind and my heart are expanding. And then the next keynoter the next day is a guy named Ishmael Bea, who came from Sierra Leone and was a child soldier. If you've seen Blood Diamond, it was from those kinds of terrible, terrible forms of exploitation of groups taking advantage of people, exploiting people to get diamonds and sell them. And then as there would be conflicts between various governments, those groups would then get children to be their soldiers. So he was brought out by UNICEF, and he talked that story of his process of redemption. And he never talked about religion in any way, but it's one of those stories that's so powerful, that somehow the divine is in the work of that redemption of someone who has been through such terrible, terrible trauma and done such terrible things. And then the preacher for that weekend was the pastor of Blacksburg Presbyterian Church in Virginia, and they asked him to come and to preach because he's a gifted preacher. And the invitation for him to come to preach and the conference itself were on both sides of the Virginia Tech shooting. So some of the students that came with him that were involved in the campus ministry there spoke about that experience, and one of them had been shot, and she talked about the trauma of that experience being on that campus. And so that weekend, I'm suddenly thinking, I don't know if my experience of church, of the rules of how to behave, and the rules of don't talk about anything that's going to ruffle feathers, or the rules of don't put politics and religion together on a Sunday morning, those things no longer felt big enough for the stories I'm hearing from Shane and Ishmael and the preacher and the students, especially the student who was shot at Virginia Tech. And I'm suddenly starting to realize that maybe church is so much bigger than I thought. Maybe the call to follow Jesus is a lot bigger than I thought. And my mind changes quickly. Heart and mind expand. And as I think about our story for today, this text where Jesus and the disciples are coming into Jerusalem, this is for Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the story of Jesus' ministry really is one of, the baptism being way out on the margins with John the Baptist, and then a year of ministry that kind of goes a little bit all over the place, but ends up in Jerusalem. The entry into Jerusalem and what happens in Jerusalem with Palm Sunday and the crucifixion and the resurrection, that is the climax in a lot of ways of that story. And as Jesus is coming into Jerusalem, some of the disciples that are with him, we assume maybe have never seen Jerusalem or seen this temple. And they've only heard stories from folks who had made this pilgrimage, and they see it and they look up at it and they're marveling. And then Jesus is kind of surprising. Instead of saying like, yeah, they've got that, yeah, that's a painting of, that story, and that's a painting there. And he just says this is all going to come crumbling down. And it's true that the temple was destroyed right before this gospel would have been written. So there's probably some of that at work here of saying like, hey, look, don't think that the temple is the end all be all. And Jesus knows that the divine works even when the temple has been destroyed and we've been through trauma. But what I love is that idea of Jesus almost in a rude way, kind of yucking their yum, right? Saying like the minute you fall into that trap of making it an idol rather than an icon, we're in trouble. And that's a distinction that a theologian likes to use, Pete Rollins, of idols are things that absorb our worship and icons are things that point to what we should worship. And we have to be careful as to not let the icons become idols. And I think about, I do this so often when I think about other churches. I don't know if any clergy will admit to this or not, but I know I do. Well, they would admit it to me. I don't know if they'll admit it into a microphone. I don't know if I'm silly or going to get in trouble for doing this. But I'll look at a church website and just get like, oh man, like that's really, I love how they did that, right? And I have folks that have contacted us and they've said like, hey, like, whoever does your social media, whoever does your website, they're doing great. I should pass those emails along to you. And they're saying like, Evergreen, y'all have beer and hymns. Evergreen, we've seen pictures of your space, and this sculpture you got on the ceiling looks so so great. And I had this moment of like pride. And they're like, how did you do that? And I'm like, well, I didn't really do any of it. It was a lot of this stuff was already happening. It was already here, or someone else is doing it. But yeah, it is really cool. But I have to be careful because there's a bit of that like sanctuary envy or church program envy where we start thinking about like the way a building looks or the vibes or the culture of a faith community or the programs they have, right? You start kind of thinking like, ooh, that's really good. That's really, really cool. And that's, how can I do that here at Evergreen? And I start realizing, man, that is a really slippery slope to worshiping some idols, right? That our programs and beautiful aesthetics and setting a sacred space and that is hospitable for folks and making sure things are accessible through a strong website and strong social media, all that is important, but all that should be icons that point to what's really the most important, rather than idols that we think are the end all be all. And I just think about how many places of faith and how often do we set our eyes on that temple? Do we gaze at something that gets our attention that is beautiful, that is impressive? But we forget that just below the temple, there are people right in front of us who are suffering and in pain. But because we're so busy looking there, we can't notice their suffering right in front of us. I think about I wonder how many congregations right here in Memphis won't talk about tyrannicals this morning. Because that's not for the church, right? Like that's another issue, especially how many white churches will say things like, well, that's, it's not our community. Church is where you come to talk about God, not where you come to talk about what's going on, right? Like, how many churches will fall into that trap of saying, let's just come here for comfort. Let's just come here to take a deep breath. Let's just come here to listen to good music and feel inspired. Let's not actually have to talk about what's going on in the world. How many of them just want to look and gaze upon the beauty of the temple rather than talk about the pain that's really happening? I'm really grateful that Evergreen has committed, long before I came, to being a place where you don't come to avoid the tough stuff. You come here to try to find the meaning in it and the sense of call in it. And that is really amazing. And that's really beautiful because we're in a place where we have such an opportunity to find icons together that point to where we really need to be going. In a time where there's so much temptation to look at the idols of Christian nationalism, to look at the idols of systems of supremacy and domination and violence and brutality, and to think that that's where we'll find our hope, right? To look at those and to say that somehow these ideas of domination are in line with Jesus Christ, that's where we'll find our hope, right? That's how our fears will be responded to, is by putting more hope in violence. What I love about this text with Jesus and the disciples is that there's a little bit of hope. It's kind of snarky and it's hard to find, but I sense a little bit of hope in Jesus saying that the whole temple is going to come crumbling to the ground one day. Because that's kind of like at the root of the gospel is this message of death and resurrection, is this message of things will die, but then there is resurrection that comes not too long after. And sometimes that death is painful and it is tragic. And the promise of resurrection is about the new life and God's love that will not be extinguished from that tragedy. Sometimes that death is a necessary death. It's a system that is beyond reform and has to come crumbling down. And the resurrection that comes is a new life that is needed, that can take its place. And as we reflect as a city on what has happened and what is happening in our whole society around death and domination and systemic racism that is embedded in every element of the DNA of our culture, how do we discern where there is death that is painful? Sometimes it's very obvious. And try to find resurrection and new life. And where is there death that maybe God is calling for, to say that needs to come crumbling down so that I can guide you into making something new and more beautiful. I have really loved the folks on social media who have shared some of Tyree's photography. I don't know if you've had the chance to look at it or not. And the artist and the eye that he had for his place in Memphis. CK was talking to me about it last night, about those moments when he wanted people to see Memphis the way he saw it. I love when people said, he loved sunsets. So look at your favorite picture, post your favorite picture at sunsets. And it's hard to imagine, if you're like me, it might be hard to imagine that in a traumatic death like that one, that there can be resurrection and new life. But I hope as we gather here today, I really hope that we can have some sort of sense of urgency and prophetic imagination that can hope that on the other side of eternity, he is finding the warmth of God's embrace that reminds him of the embrace of his mom. I hope that we together can be guided to work for that resurrection, to witness to the love of God that Reform is needed and changes is needed, and even destruction and death is needed, because resurrection is what God is all about, and resurrection is what really brings us together and what really calls us to follow Jesus. Resurrection is the end of the story, not death. I mentioned Tony Campolo earlier. He once preached a sermon where he talked about how it's Friday, but Sunday's coming. It's Friday and Jesus is on the cross, and it's pain, and the sky is gray, and it looks completely desolate and hopeless. But Easter Sunday and resurrection and new life are coming. And it's Friday, and that footage has been made public. And we see another lynching in our society, and we start to kind of wonder how many more, because we can't name them all. And we try to tell ourselves that Sunday's coming, that somehow that resurrection, new life is coming. And that's what I hope we can find together, my friends. I hope we can find that hope for resurrection, that longing. And if one of you can't find it, I hope you know that you are part of a community that can try to help find it for you when you can't. It can help you find comfort when you can't, and find meaning out of the mess when you can't. And I hope that you can find yourself in a beloved community that wants to follow Jesus, that isn't going to try to avoid all the tough stuff, that isn't going to try to get suckered into all this idol worship stuff, but instead will look to the icons that point us to peace and love, compassion, justice, and human flourishing. Because that is what God has called us to. And I hope we have the strength to witness the promise of resurrection, to witness to the promise of God's holy. I'd like to kind of bridge the gap between the sermon and our practice of silence today with a liturgy that kind of does both those things. And I appreciate Catherine passing these out. I invite you to join me in the liturgy. We may feel anger this morning, or numbness, or all of the above. God of beauty, we ask for your spirit to comfort us, sustain us, and allow our tears and our anger to motivate our work for justice. You call your world into a cycle of death and resurrection, so we lift up to you now what systems, ideologies, and horrors we wish to see die. So you all, I ask that you feel free in a word, 2 words, 3 words. What are those things that you want to see die in our society? White supremacy.
Murder. Police brutality. Predatory capitalism.
Capitalism.
Brutality. Hatred.
American passions.
Arrogance. Workshop at prisons. National. Superiority.
We lift up to you now where we yearn to see resurrection, new life, and redemption. My friends, 1, 2, 3 words.
Here.
Passion. Love. Bond. Purpose. Dancing.
As we close and we continue to ponder on where death and resurrection can show up in our lives and in our community, our city and our world, I open up our time of silence with these words from Cole Arthur Riley, the creator and author of Black Liturgies. He was an artist. He lived embodied. He knew beauty and called it by its name. Tyree Nichols will always be a mystery to a world that destroys far more than it creates or marvels. He deserved more than this cursed country could give. For our offering this morning, I'd like you all to consider a couple of things, the ways you could support UCURT Memphis. It's a campus ministry that serves students at Rose and University of Memphis. And Latifa, a while back, printed out the QR code so you can go to the website and support it financially. And that QR code is up on the bulletin board in the hall. I know, just to be completely transparent, I loved campus ministry when I was a college student. Before I came here, I was the campus minister at UCURT Birmingham, and now I'm the chair of the UCURT Memphis committee. But I also know that there are a lot more urgent, pressing organizations that you can give time and money to. Sometimes it's tough to want to give to college students when we know that there's so many urgent needs around folks who are unhoused or experiencing violence of various forms or being marginalized or healthcare. We could name so many things. But I do believe that the Spirit of God works in spaces like campus ministry. It certainly did for me when I was at college conference at Montreat, and my idea of what the church should be and what following Jesus looks like should be was completely changed and altered. So if you'd like to support the college students, the work that they do, I invite you to use that QR code or just Google UCURT Memphis. I know that a couple ways that you can help right away is A, just making a financial gift, or B, if you want to cook dinner on a Thursday night, or just buy dinner for these students. There's a sign-up sheet. I can get you that link. I think that's also from the QR code up there on the board, where you can get them some food. And you can just drop it off, or you can stay there and hang out with them. And sometimes it's good for the soul in seasons like this to be around a group of students and laugh with them and hear the insight and wisdom that they have and find community in spaces like that. Friends, let's go to God with our offering.
We'll keep our seats, so the offertory hymn is number 753. And this is set up kind of a little sneakily the way it's laid out. It makes it look like there's 3 verses and a chorus that we'll sing 3 times. Do not be fooled. That chorus is actually verse 3, so we're only singing it once. And as far as verse 3, in the spirit of co-creating this peaceful world that we want to share, I'd like us to make a lyric change and sing O Maker, Grant. So for verse 3, we'll open that with O Maker. That's 753.
Gracious God, for what we can offer one another, what we can offer ourselves, what we can offer our communities, we give you thanks. And we pray that what we can offer will build up equity and justice and peace. In your many names we pray. Amen.
Now please rise in body, mind, and spirit to the doxology. The lyrics are printed in your bulletin.
Please be seated in body or in spirit. As we sing number 796, we come to you for healing, Lord.
Friends, you're invited, if you know the lyrics to the postlude, to gather around the piano and have a good old-fashioned sing-along with Catherine.
No pressure.
And also, you're invited right after you get your lungs all worked up singing over there to get these bags into some cars. Friends, as you go from this place, know and trust that God's love is with you. That the waters of baptism show God's claim, and that God knows who you are and that you are called. You are called to discern where there is death to offer comfort, where there is death that is needed to be part of the resurrection, and that either way, in times of pain and sorrow, or in times of much needed reform, God is in the business of bringing about new life. And we're called to be a part of it. Go in peace.